tension is peaking, it seems. Ian, in Ukraine there, this UN Security Council meeting really just one front in what seems to be a series of efforts by the United States and allies to back down the Kremlin. You have the economic sanctions being outlined in some detail so that it wouldn't come as a surprise to Russia. You have intelligence being shared with the world that there are quislings, as it were, in Ukraine, naming names, that there are Ukrainian figures whom Russia is talking about installing as a puppet government, and of course the talk about shifting American forces. Is any of this, do you think, changing the atmosphere there? Do you think it's getting, is a hard question to answer, but is getting that man in the Kremlin to think twice?
Yeah, I mean, this is all about deterrent, isn't it? There was a fascinating roundtable here in Kiev today, which was attended by no less than 4 or 5 former US ambassadors to Ukraine, one to Russia, as well as senior Ukrainian diplomatic and military officials, and former US generals as well, who've been in charge of NATO or US forces in Europe. And they all really discuss the same issue. How do you deter Vladimir Putin from invading? And I think a lot of them welcomed the sanctions that have been raised by the Foreign Affairs Committee, that have been raised by President Biden. But I think there was a general feeling in that room that more needed to be done. We've heard this discussion about the possible deployment of US and other NATO troops to NATO's eastern flank. There was a general sense that that would have an impact. It would also give potentially Ukraine and NATO something of a bargaining chip, because then they could cut a deal, say, look, you withdraw your forces, we withdraw our forces, and then you can lower the tempo. The other thing that struck me was it seemed to be broad unanimity that the increased supply of weapons, and we're reporting on this and watching some of those weapons coming in over the last week, has certainly been welcomed, but there was a general sense more needs to be done, again, to act as a deterrent. That's not how the Kremlin will see it. They'll see it as provocative. They'll see it as more proof that the West, that America, that NATO is interfering and trying to take over Ukraine, and that it will one day be right on Russia's doorstep. But that's the sense here. Now, the other thing I think just worth mentioning briefly is that I certainly detected an increase in tempo of Ukrainians getting ready just in case the worst happens. We're seeing these civilian defense training going on. We were together with Army reservists at the weekend, people who are bankers, journalists, civil engineers, IT engineers, but they basically have said if an invasion comes, they're going to sign up. Also, some people stocking up at home, getting ready, getting their papers in order in case they have to flee. That's people here in Kiev. So that's the kind of atmosphere here on the ground. There is no panic, but people are taking this seriously.
Yeah, civilians are an important asset in a time of war. No doubt they have a responsibility as well. Mick, just playing off of what Ian said, and the warnings, the clear warnings from the West, are they meant to be provocative?
No, Kira, I don't think so. I think this crisis, again, was caused by Russia, and it's quite frankly backfired on them. Because of their actions, now NATO is more relevant than it has been since the Cold War. Military activities increased. We're talking about a troop deployment of almost 10,000 American forces. I would guess that all the NATO countries now will be considering paying their fair share into the collective defense, and that you'll see some former satellite states now looking to become part of NATO. So it might be provocative, but it was provoked by Russian activities and a threat of an invasion. I do think, Vladimir Putin is a former KGB colonel. He understands how difficult this is going to be militarily, because it is. They will overmatch the Ukrainians on the conventional side, but the insurgency that's going to follow, inevitably going to follow, is going to be brutal.
Ian, do you mind just expanding a little bit more about what Ukrainians are doing to prepare for this invasion? You touched on it a little bit. We found it very interesting early on. We were talking to our Stephanie Ramos, who, as you know, is there on the ground in Ukraine as well. She profiled this women's guard. I found very interesting, teaching everyday women who are looking after the kids how to, carry out self-defense, how to fire a weapon, how to prepare if their home is invaded. Have you seen this before? Because these threats are not new of an invasion, but are these tactics, these lessons, these strategies, the training, is this new?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly escalated. So interestingly, there's a former MP who had been a journalist. He'd been an activist in the community, and then he became a member of Parliament, essentially to try and tackle corruption in the country. He was important in enacting anti-corruption legislation. Now, he was one of the people at this meeting here, and we spent time with his wife, who's a leading news anchor here in Ukraine, and their family. And this is a kind of, regular upper middle class family. They're pretty well off, but hearing them talk about how their friends, their neighbours, their colleagues at work, everyone is talking about this now, and everyone is making plans. To hear the wife say that she's got all their papers in order for them and for their parents, in other words, their passports, their residency, all of that stuff, in case they have to move. They've already got a plan of where they're actually going to move to in the west of the country. So, yes, people are absolutely taking this threat seriously. I mean, and so they should. But what you're also seeing is an uptick in the numbers of people volunteering for these forces. So this one particular unit of these reservists has seen a 30% increase in volunteers since November last year. In other words, when Putin started to mass his forces around the border. And just picking up on what Mick said, because I think this is really important, what happened in 2014 essentially backfired for Vladimir Putin. Yes, of course, he annexed Crimea and he effectively orchestrated the takeover of the Donbass region, or parts of the Donbass region in the east of the country. But he also sent a message to everyone who was on the fence, if you like, about should we join NATO, should we join Europe. If you look at the opinion polls here, there's now an overwhelming majority who are absolutely convinced this is for them. And it's the same message that's kind of received by Eastern Europe. In some senses, it strengthens and stiffens their resolve, their desire to be part of the Western alliance, part of NATO, part of Europe, part of that infrastructure, and to turn their back on Putin. And that has to be part of his calculation as well.
It does seem counterproductive, but he wouldn't be the first autocratic leader to make a strategic error in the name of conquering a neighboring country. We've seen that plenty as we enter the final phases, what feel like the final phases of this crisis, one way or the other. Ian Panel, Mick Mulroy, thanks very much.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.